damning all this evidence was, the feelings around this would be mostly the same. But even with all that footage, we had takes like Drake's, who said had Tyree complied, none of it would have happened. Which, I mean, I get it, man. You're wrapping up 8th grade, discovering 4chan, thinking comments like this are funny. Your brain's still a little bit of a mushball, although you weren't the only people with the fucking horrible take. Others trying to frame the situation as him clearly resisting arrest. But understand, really, no one, not even their own chief of police, agreed with y'all. And Didi, I feel like, had the perfect response for this vocal minority of idiots. Writing, I've seen too many people claiming he was resisting without ever addressing the fact that officers made it all but impossible for him to not resist, and leaving out the fact that Tyree was clearly attempting to comply. And the biggest takeaway from Nichols' death was just how hard the footage hit so many of you. And here I do want to reiterate, I think you should watch the footage. I'm not going to force you. It is brutal. It's hard to get through. But I feel like, especially if this hasn't hit you as hard as it's hitting many people, it's important to see the raw truths in the world, both to see what actually happened as well as to understand why so many people are scared of police in this country. And finally, we had Mr. PB concisely contrasting how the Memphis PD reacted compared to the Atlanta police who had to chase a guy onto train tracks when their car was stolen. Writing, gotta love how a guy literally stole a police car and put 7 officers in danger, and all of them still had the calm not to use him as a UFC practice dummy. But Tyree didn't even get a chance to ask what he did wrong before getting pummeled. And then on Tuesday, we touched on Atrioc's deepfake porn controversy, the mystery at the Dallas Zoo, a woman using a doppelganger to fake her death, no more COVID, and Santos almost but not really taking accountability for his lies. Which, first off, I had myself a laugh when I read Scott's reaction to the Santos news that he'd be stepping down from the committees temporarily, saying let's give a round of applause to Santos for proving that politicians actually can lie too much. But the story y'all jumped on the most was the woman who faked her death by killing someone who looked like her to avoid, quote, family problems. With Martin saying the story gave him a new phobia. Saying, you know, with all the doom and gloom in the past 3 years, I gotta say there are a lot of reasons why I'm now scared that someone might kill me, but I really didn't think because I look like someone who wants to fake their death could be one of those reasons before now. And Maxissimo touching on something we really hadn't thought about. Imagine finding out your daughter is dead, then finding out she's still alive, and then finding out she's a murderer who killed someone else just not to confront you. Which, yeah, emotional roller coaster. Also, regarding the Dallas Zoo situation, first off, an update, those 2 missing Emperor Tamarin monkeys were actually found in an abandoned home. So fantastic that they're not dead like it was feared. And actually, quick update, they managed to finally arrest the guy they've been looking for while he was snooping around an aquarium, which is kind of hilarious because it's like catching a bank robber at a credit union. But also what's crazy is that breaking into zoos doesn't seem to be an isolated thing. Right? We had people like Tate telling us about the Vancouver Zoo. Writing, the Vancouver Zoo had multiple fences cut last year and the wolves released, saying one of them was hit on a nearby highway, one was missing for a week before being found dead in a ditch after being hit by a car, and the rest were returned to their pens safely. Not only were the wolves not wild, but they have spent their whole lives in captivity. It's what's safest for them with their pack, loved by caretakers, fed and safe. Shame on humans for doing this to zoos, and arguing it's almost never for the animal's benefit. Although a quick clarification, that comment read like 2 wolves died but only 1 did, but the point still stands. Well, a lot of you just express frustration in general that people are stealing or letting animals go without considering how dangerous it is for them. But of course, any conversation about the Tuesday show, it's not complete without talking about the Atrioc deepfake drama. Which, I mean, regarding deepfakes in general, there was a general sense that there needs to be severe penalties, or as Kim said, the whole deepfake part really do need to have a change in how laws work. Like, the whole thing is just weird, and I honestly think that faces should go under copyright. Just imagine how much it could change if you could mess over a site because they have 300 copyright violations of your face. And there was absolutely a ton of support in the comments for Cutie Cinderella and the other women who had to put up with this. With Wesley giving us a lesson in empathy, right? Trying to put yourself in someone else's shoes, saying, God, as a man, I can't imagine what Cutie is going through. It's actually just horrendous that this is a thing that happens. It's gotta be so freaky and creepy on top of everything else they deal with. I hope the people making these get some sort of punishment. They probably won't, though. And actually, on that note, we covered on Wednesday some of what Atrioc was doing to try and make amends, and how Cutie was planning to continue her lawsuit against the website, which was definitely something y'all were rooting for. But more than that, there were a lot of questions about Ethan Klein, with Chepin wondering which one of Ethan's oops moments is going to get it. Writing, I just want to know how many times Ethan Klein can do stuff like this and people just give him a slap on the wrist. And Perusa saying on the Wednesday show, at this point, I'm 100% convinced that Ethan Klein does all these wrong reactions on purpose. Every time one outrage fades, he just so happens to piss off an entire new genre of people, does a somber sorry video, waits a week or two, then rinse and repeat. And that, of course, was in addition to all the pushback to his reaction, with a number of people calling him a hypocrite, saying that he would have a drastically different initial reaction if this was happening to Hila. Though there, I would say the unfortunate truth is that Hila ends up being a constant target because people want to hurt Ethan. And that absolutely sucks in general, but also especially because it's Hila, and she seems so fantastic. And then on Wednesday, we talked about organ harvesting, YouTube apologies, UK strikes, and EPA decisions. Now, regarding the YouTube apologies, we already went over that in the Tuesday section. So the obvious thing to do is just go straight into talking about me. With Gaston writing, I used to watch Phil many years ago, and now I see him, and damn, he still has that same good energy. To which I'll say thank you, and also I've just been faking it this week, if I'm being honest. Mentally and emotionally speaking, this was an off week. You know, you do something for 15 years, and you learn how to power through the bad days, because you know a good one's coming around the corner. But as far as the stories, you know, sometimes we get comments that perfectly sum things up. And Zikar, I think, nailed Massachusetts' proposal to let prisoners donate organs for reduced sentences. Writing, nice to see we're entering the harvesting organs from prisoners era of our dystopia. And really, most of you seem to agree where I landed, that the system as proposed sounds like it's open to exploitation, while also recognizing there's some sense in allowing it for families. It also ended up sparking wider conversations about making organ donation opt-out instead of opt-in, right? You'd be a donor by default and need to choose to not to be, which I agree with, and I believe in certain countries where they changed it from opt-in to opt-out, the number of donations spiked because, as it turns out, people want to help, they are open to donating, but adding the extra step to have people opt in, it made it so that people were like, too much work, which is also part of the reason why so many new products and services come as a subscription first. If something requires extra effort, it's just not done. But moving on, Alaskans seem to just be over the Pebble Mine project. There's actually not much to add there other than I learned that y'all love fishing and wildlife and you don't want it messed up, which, also makes sense considering how much money that brings to the state and how beautiful it remains to be. And lastly, the UK strikes that are going on. First up, so many British bastards were stoked that we were even talking about it. However, I was shocked to read, I'm in the UK, I legitimately don't follow the news and had no idea about the strikes. I'm struggling to live and pay my bills and I'm glad these people are striking. I'd be with them if I didn't need to work. Also, another common thread was how this was impacting students. There were a lot of comments from them frustrated about the strikes, but not because they were happening, but because they felt their universities were punishing them in the end. Like, here's how Emerson described it. As a disabled student in the UK, the strikes give me complicated feelings. Yes, I totally agree why they're striking and it can work, but their strikes have wiped out my timetable. I have 2 classes in February and 5 in March. 56% of my classes just won't happen if the situation isn't resolved. No one's given us any explanations to how this affects our grades, and there's no plan to get any of this time back. On top of that, what happens to our tuition fees of £4,625, with full-time students paying £9,250? I know a lot of people have loans, but loans aren't free money. Honestly, it makes me more annoyed at the university for just expecting us to deal with all the uncertainty and seeming to just ignore the problem. And that doesn't even delve into the issue they and just about everyone faced trying to get to school or work and back. Although that's not to say that everyone was 100% happy with the strikes. Right? Some workers were frustrated that they wouldn't do enough and make things worse. With Brad telling us, as a civil servant in the UK, the general feel is that the strikes won't do much at all. The actual fear with the strike date was how much more work will we have to get through, as there is already insane backlogs and staff shortages. A single strike day does nothing and just hurts the workers. And as far as I know, in my department in particular, there is no future plans for more strikes. Just fluff by the union to make people believe they're doing something. Made me very desensitized and actively looking for new employment elsewhere. And someone seemingly outside the strikes described the real world impacts that they're facing, saying, as a Brit, all these strikes are scary and frustrating. I have a very unwell mom who often needs access to urgent medical care. But with paramedics striking, ambulance wait times are incredibly long and people are dying while waiting. Add to that, there's also more traffic as people are driving due to lack of buses, trains, etc. The wards are even more understaffed now and we're experiencing medication shortages. Bad times. And to that, I get the frustration and worry, and I'm sure the people on strike too. Right? Because also their argument's gonna be that none of this would happen in the first place if they were just paid in line with the massive rise in the cost of living, right? Because the only other option is just to sit there and take it. But hey, with this, especially if you're in the strikes, let me know what your thoughts are regarding all these comments. And then on Thursday, we talked about Joe Rogan's take on obesity, Netflix's back and forth with passwords, Squid Game being, well, Squid Game, and Snapchat ruining a killer's alibi. Starting with Alec Murdoch, he seems pretty screwed after Snapchats that he probably thought were gone forever managed to place him at the scene of the crime around the time that it happened. But the fact that was even possible had Stell going. Being able to deduce a crime scene minute by minute from technology records is actually pretty insane. Then of course there was a Squid Game controversy, where some contestants are allegedly saying Netflix's real version of the game is rigged and dangerous. Kim Jong-un laughed at the absurdity of real life parodying art and adding, the irony of the Squid Game reality game being rigged or having terrible conditions is comical. But the Netflix story that really resonated with y'all was their proposed crackdown on password share, right, where they would force people to essentially be in the same homes or not really have access to accounts, only then to claim, oops, those updates aren't real, to try and calm people down. And I think it says a lot about Netflix's leadership when I can quickly scroll through my comments and find people who have a better understanding of a user's mindset. Like this one reading, Netflix execs seem to imagine their ideal world where people who can't get shared passwords anymore say, well, gosh, I'll have to get my own Netflix account now, and not, guess I'm gonna go pirate this. So it's not surprising that viewers like Callie are now planning to cancel their Netflix subs. However, we have to talk about the story that I knew was gonna get controversial in the comments, the obesity story. Right, an expert in the field who works for the Biden administration came out and said genetics were the leading cause of obesity and that willpower was often not enough. Joe Rogan and others going after her for this take, even though on nearly every other point, Rogan actually agreed that there were many causes outside of just willpower that could lead people to struggle to lose weight. So what I saw was that many of you shared your stories about struggling with your weight, which I greatly appreciated. I know that's not easy. But, the idea that genetics played a role wasn't controversial for a lot of people, with many of you feeling like that was obvious. But there were a lot more comments that felt like focusing on things like mental health was a bigger deal for them. Right, and that's including things like learning poor coping mechanisms from eating food or just growing up in a bad environment. Like Space Badger's story was very similar to others. Right, my experience never felt like my massive weight came from genetics, but if you take into account mental health disorders like anxiety and depression, emotional eating and binging can very easily become the coping mechanism. Adding in trauma will cause more of a need to cope, not to mention other genetic illnesses which may directly affect metabolism and digestive processes. And on this, I do want to clarify some things. Dr. Stanford was only saying that genetics can play a large role in why people struggle to lose weight, right? Not the only reason. And for some or many people, it may not even be a reason. So everything Space just said are also completely valid reasons to struggle with weight loss. But I think clarifying Dr. Stanford's point might be good here. What she said was that for many people, it's hard to lose weight because their brain